Hey folks, Joe with JACBC Baseball Collector here, coming back at you with another video. Today we've got the American League West preview for the 2023 season. I hope you enjoyed the NL West preview that dropped on the channel yesterday. Know that one ran a little long, so hoping for this one to be a little bit more efficient. But if you did miss that one, I'll link it down in the description below so that you can check it out or jump around, try to find a team that you want to get a little bit of insight on. So before we get started, just a quick recap of how I structured these videos. I go through each team in the division. I highlight some of their notable offseason moves, additions, losses. I do kind of a stud and a dud section, so a star player on the team that's worth highlighting. A guy is I think going to regress or is a bust. The prospect to watch, kind of their top prospect or a notable prospect to watch in the system for this year. And then, a bounce back candidate, a sleeper, or a breakout candidate. So some combination of that, not necessarily every single one of those iterations, but one of those. And then an over-under on wins. I used the Barstool Sportsbook over-under numbers from a couple weeks ago that I jotted down originally. I haven't checked if they've moved, but I do the over-under based on those figures. All right, so without further ado, let's get into this one and start it off with the basement dwellers scraping the bottom of the barrel team in the majors, not just in the AL West, the Oakland Athletics. So as far as the offseason went, they made a couple of little moves around the edges. They did, acquire Astros Ruiz, who's going to be a decent player, someone we're going to talk about a little later. They did also add JACBC, who was a former top pick, a pretty highly regarded prospect a few years back, a big chase, and I believe it was 2020 Bowman, maybe 2020 Bowman or Bowman Chrome, maybe Bowman Draft. But he was, pretty highly regarded a few years back when he first busted in. He's really fallen off. He hasn't really produced. But we'll see if he can get his career back on track with the Athletics this season. As far as losses go, their big loss was this guy right here. It was Sean Murphy. So Murphy's a top 5 catcher in all of baseball. They shipped him off to the Braves, and they actually got Ruiz back as part of a 3-way deal with the Brewers, which I think William or Wilson, I always forget which is which, went to the Brewers, and then Ruiz came back to the Athletics. So they're definitely going to miss him. He's a stud, top 5 catcher in baseball. They also lost AJ Puck, but I don't think he's really worth talking about too much. As far as stud and dud go, they didn't really have too much in the term of studs or star power department, but the guy I will call out in this department is Ramon Laureano. So he's actually a guy I kind of like. Like I said, he's not quite a stud, but he's just about the best that this team has to offer. He's had a kind of an up and down career. I think he had a PED suspension at one point. He's had some injuries that plagued him, but he has 20/20 power and speed. He really does have a lot of talent. So if he can kind of, keep his hot head in line, not mess around with the PED stuff anymore, actually stay on the field, he certainly can go 20/20. And he is one of the elite outfield arms in all of baseball. I think, he's not a tremendous defender, if I remember the metrics correctly, but he does have an absolutely elite arm out there in left or center field, wherever he's playing at a given time. Next, we're going to jump over to their prospect because, well, actually looking to the dud section, which I kind of glossed over here, the bust, I don't have one because pretty much the whole team is duds. I mean, this is a very disgraceful franchise. We talked about that a little bit with the Rockies yesterday on the NL West, but the A's are probably even worse than them, quite frankly. At least they have Chris Bryant, right? So this is, the whole team is duds. The whole team has a chance to be just absolutely horrendous. So I'm not even going to go through line by line because there's just so many guys who could fit into that mold. So we will jump to the prospect watch. Athletics farm system based on Keith Law's rankings is the 27th ranked system in the majors, which really isn't great, given the fact that they're a pretty crummy team, and they don't have really a great or deep farm system. That's definitely not, what you want to see. But this guy is a bright spot right here. It's Tyler Soderstrom. So this is a guy, he's the 51st ranked prospect on average across Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, and MLB Pipeline. He did spend time in all 3 levels last year, A, AA, AAA, and he performed really well at each level. So he's a bat. He has a good bat. It should play in the majors for sure. He has big left-handed power, but the question for him is where he's actually, what position he's actually gonna land in. Let's see what they have him listed as here. Do they have him listed as I think a catcher maybe? I don't know if I see it on here. Oh yeah, listed C. So he's listed as a catcher, but I don't know if they think he's going to stick at the position. He's really more of an offensive type guy. So we'll see where he ends up. But he'll probably get a chance to break in with the team sometime this year, just given how bad the organization is, how bad the team is, how bad the roster construction is. If he continues to show off at AAA like he did last year, he's certainly going to have a chance to bust in to the bigs with the Athletics this season. All right, now for a sleeper or potential breakout candidate, and then a guy who I think potential bounce back. We'll see. The bounce back or the sleeper / breakout guy is Asturi Ruiz. So here's his first Bowman back from when he was with the Padres. Oddly enough, this is a guy who's already been with 5 different organizations, and he's just 23 years old. So he's not super young. He's not one of these 20 or 21-year-olds. But he's bounced around already to 5 different organizations before he's ever even made it to the major leagues. So he's going to have a chance to be the full-time center fielder for the Athletics this year, which is, good for him because, like I said, the team is just horrendous. So no reason for him not to get a full-time chance. But he hit .332 with 16 homers and 85 stolen bases in the minors last year. So, putting that into perspective, like nobody steals that amount of bases in the bigs anymore. So, if he could just actually get on base, especially with these rule changes, the pitch clock stuff, the bigger bases, some of these rule changes, he could be the first guy to steal 70 since Jose Reyes back in, I think it was 2007. So he has a real chance to be a difference maker on the base paths and make some real noise with his speed. His big question, obviously, will just be like how much he's able to actually get on base. All right, and a potential bounce back candidate. This one I'm a little biased on because I pulled a lot of his stuff in 2021. There's a lot of really nice stuff of his, and I'm obviously hoping for him to bounce back. It's maybe more selfish than anything, but I do think he's a guy who has some talent and he's really easy to root for, and that's Christian Pache. So we have this beautiful Topps Chrome Sapphire autograph of his from 2021 rookie card, and he used to be a really highly touted prospect. I mean, he was a big-time chase in early 2021 products. Everyone was after his rookies and his autos and other things. But he's been just dreadful for the past 2 seasons. Just absolutely dreadful. His development really got stunted following the COVID season. So the minor league players didn't play at all in 2020. I mean, they kind of played a little bit, but they didn't play official minor league games anywhere. And he really just fell off a cliff after that. But he should, I think, probably get a decent amount of playing time this year between Ruiz and Blade and him. They'll probably all share playing time, and obviously all it takes is one injury for him to get a whole ton of playing time. So, like I said, this is a guy that I'm just kind of like personally rooting for, and I do think he has a chance to bounce back because he does have a ton of talent. He's a good defender, and just kind of hoping that he can regain the form that he once had in the Braves system. So getting to over-under now as we take the cards down off of the showcase. The Athletics over-under for this year is 59.5, which I think was the absolute lowest among any team in the majors. Maybe the Rockies was right around there. I can't remember what I said it was yesterday. They won 60 games last year, and, in my opinion, they got much worse. They got even worse. They got a lot worse this year. They didn't do really anything for their franchise. They're really a disgraceful organization, so I'm going to go under 59.5. I'd be shocked if they even win maybe 55 games. All right, moving on to the next team, we have the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. I don't know if that's what they're called anymore. I think they might just be the Los Angeles Angels, but I always call them the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim or the Anaheim Angels or the California Angels. Tons of different fun names for them. As far as their offseason moves go, they didn't make a ton, which I think, a lot of folks were a little surprised by. They acquired Tyler Anderson, who had a really nice breakout season with the Dodgers last year. He had a 2.57 ERA. But I don't really think a lot of people expect him to repeat that. I think a lot of the conventional wisdom is that he'll kind of regress back a little bit, especially pitching in the American League. They added Gio Urshela from the Twins, Hunter Renfroe, who should be, a decent little addition for them. But they didn't even have really any notable losses. But they didn't make any big splashes either, which you would have thought they might try to do with Ohtani potentially walking after this season. So a little bit surprising the approach that they took this offseason. And speaking of Mr. Ohtani, he is obviously the stud that we're going to highlight. I have both of his Topps Finest rookie cards here. One is a batter, one is a pitcher. When you talk about this guy, you got to talk about both sides of the ball. I mean, he's just a generational talent. What more needs to be said about this guy? He's the modern day Babe Ruth. There's no one better in the game than him. Obviously Judge had the MVP season last year. He was better than him, in the isolated 2022 season, but overall, Shohei Ohtani is just he's the greatest baseball player on the planet when you take into account what he does on both sides of the ball. I don't have to get into all his numbers. Everybody knows what he brings to the table. But I can't, I'd be remiss if I didn't also call out Mike Trout. So, he's almost playing second fiddle now to Ohtani, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But, I think that he's still the guy. He's still a perennial MVP candidate. If he could stay healthy with some of this weird back stuff that he's been experiencing, if he could stay healthy, he's a guy who's going to start approaching some of the big milestones relatively rapidly. I think he's only 150 homers away from 500, and he's just unworldly. So if he can stay healthy enough throughout his 30s, he's a Hall of Famer today. And so everything from here is just going to be, icing on the cake. He's one of the best, most talented, most dynamic players I've ever seen. He's kind of the Mickey Mantle of our day. If Ohtani's the Babe of our day, Trout is the Mickey of our day. There's no doubt about that, in my opinion. As far as the dud, kind of the bust or the regression candidate goes here, I'm going to go with Brandon Drury. So this is a top goal that I pulled a couple of weeks ago out of Series 1. So Drury broke out last season with the Pods. He had a really nice season, but before that, he was just an 84 OPS plus player. So I talked about OPS plus on yesterday's video a little bit. 84 meaning with 100 being the average, 84 meaning he was 16 percentage points below the average player in the major leagues over his career, his 1,700 prior play appearances. So he had some issues. He had these migraine issues and other stuff that was plaguing him, and maybe that was holding him back. But I really don't expect him to repeat what he did in 2022, with potentially like a really massive regression, even maybe not just even a small one. So we'll see. I think they're relying on him to be like a six hitter on the team, kind of like middle, lower third of the lineup. So if he regresses as significantly as I or some other folks think, that could definitely be a black hole for them in their lineup. Looking towards prospects in their farm system, they have the 25th ranked farm system. I actually don't have a card for this guy, and he was someone who I'd never even heard of until I started doing this research, and it's Logan O'Hoppe, or O'Hoppe, O''Hoppe. He's the 57th ranked prospect on average right now, and he originally was just kind of like nothing special. I bet you when I say his name, like a lot of people out there just have like no clue who I'm talking about. But he was with the Phillies organization for a while. He got traded in the Brandon Marsh trade when Brandon Marsh went over to the Phillies from the Angels last year. Everyone will remember Brandon Marsh, the caveman looking guy who had rookie cards in 2022 products. And he really broke out in Double-A. So he was like I said, he was never really anything special. He broke out real hard in Double-A last year. And he's going to make an immediate jump to the majors. He's probably going to be the starting catcher for the Angels this year. We'll see if he's able to make that big jump in such a short period of time. But obviously, he showed them something, and he's really impressed. So he's going to be a guy who they run out there pretty regularly. All right, bounce back candidate. My bounce back candidate this year, I think this one's kind of a no-brainer. He's just too talented, is Anthony Rendon. So we have a nice Topps Finest blue refractor here. I think that's blue, number to 300. Yeah, Anthony Rendon. So he's a prime bounce back guy, in my opinion. He was one of the best third basemen in baseball all throughout, for a number of years through 2020, right through the COVID season. But then he fell off real hard in 21 and 22. So it's both injuries, performance, just general regression. He's getting a little older. But he could probably bounce back into that. He used to be like a 5+ WAR guy. He could probably bounce back, I think, into that 5-ish WAR season if he was healthy and, climb himself back into the top 10, maybe even top 7 third basemen. He plays really good defense. He's got a great bat. If he could slot into the middle, top middle of that order, being protected with Trout and Ohtani, he could definitely have himself a nice little bounce back season. So I'll give Anthony Rendon a shout there. He could be a guy who's maybe a nice steal or a sleeper late in a fantasy draft. Another guy who I think is a nice sleeper candidate or breakout guy is Reed Detmers. So he, was a top 10 pick in 2020. He was really fast-tracked to the majors. He made his debut. I think he was drafted in 2020. He had maybe 1 year in the minors, and then, by last year, he was a full-time starter for the Angels in the rotation. He's already got a no-hitter under his belt. Everyone will probably remember the no-hitter he threw last year, I think pretty early in the season. And I think he just could be ready to take the next step. He's kind of a mid-rotation guy. He's got pretty good stuff. He's a left-handed pitcher, which, is always a plus. And, he middled around that middle of the rotation kind of numbers. I think he had 3.5 ERA, something like that. But if he could take the next step, he can prove himself to be like that, the reason they took him in the top 10, right? One of these, and they really need him to be that if they're going to take the next step, challenge the Astros, challenge the Mariners, and make some noise in this division before Ohtani potentially walks. All right, over-under time for the Angels. Their over-under is 80.5 wins. They only won 73 games last season. They were absolutely horrible. Obviously, they were missing Trout for a lot of the year, even with Ohtani having another great season. They don't have great pitching, but I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over 80.5 because it's kind of now or never. If Ohtani's potentially going to walk, the Dodgers are going to make a big play for him. I'm sure the Mets are going to make a big play for him. If that's going to be the case with this team, it's now or never. They got to do it. So I think that they're going to be a bit better. I don't know. I don't think that they can contend necessarily with the Astros, but this is their time to make a run. So I'm going to go with over 80.5 winning season for the Angels this year. All right, moving over to the Texas Rangers, another team who had themselves a pretty decent offseason. They definitely addressed some of the needs and concerns that plagued them last year after a couple of other big signings. So in terms of additions, they brought in Jacob deGrom. That was their big signing. We'll talk about him in a little bit. They brought in Jake Odorizzi. They brought in Andrew Heaney, who, I'm scarred as a Yankee fan, had one of the worst trade deadline runs of all time that I ever saw a couple of years ago. But then he had a really nice season with the Dodgers last year. They brought in Nathan Eovaldi, who's a pretty solid pitcher, and they brought in Colby Allard. So they really got deep with the arms, and they already have I think Martin Perez, who's not that great. I forget, maybe a couple of other guys there in the rotation, but they really lengthened and added to the depth of that rotation. Plus, they solidified it with that bona fide ace like Jacob deGrom. As far as losses go, the only guy who's really a notable loss, and I don't even know if he's a notable loss, is Nick Solak. He's kind of a utility man, a little bit of a throwaway here. Nothing super, super crazy as far as he goes, but he's, somebody, just worth calling out as far as a loss. All right, stud and dud. For the stud, to me, another no-brainer, it's Jacob deGrom. He immediately becomes the best player on this team. He, when healthy, is probably the best pitcher on the planet. There's some other guys in that conversation probably, but when he's healthy, I don't think there's anyone who could touch him. He just is. It's just so effortless. He's so good. He pumps that near 100-mile-an-hour fastball, and then he has just the nasty off-speed stuff. He's long. He's on potentially a Hall of Fame trajectory. He's going to be one of these guys who doesn't have the counting stats, but was his peak of dominance good enough to get him in? You kind of have to hope he is, because he's just been a really fun to watch. He's actually a guy I was at his debut, and that was actually really phenomenal. It was against the Yankees, and you could just tell from that very first game that he was something special. So, he signed the big deal. Was it 6 years or so with the Rangers? Obviously, he's already in kind of his mid-30s. So he's going to have himself some health and some production if he wants to make that Hall of Fame case for himself, which I know he does believe is very important. All right, regression time, dud, bust. I'm going to go with Marcus Semien, which is actually a pretty cool card. It's numbered to 999. It's this Bomb Squad, like gold refractory thing out of Donruss. But Marcus Semien's a guy who I think is really poised for a potential regression here. He's a guy I never really bought into myself, but he kind of keeps proving me wrong. I never really got the appeal of him, but he keeps just kind of pumping out productive seasons, which is odd enough. But, if you look at last year, 50 games into the season, he was only hitting 190. He had a 528 OPS. I mean, it looked like he had his, the air had come out of his balloon kind of thing. But then he just caught absolute fire in the second half, had, a really overall solid season because of that hot streak. But, I don't know. This is probably more of a gut thing than anything, which is, always the wrong way to go when you're looking at the numbers and analyzing the analytics and all that. But I just think that he's going to be closer to that guy he was in the first 50 games. I mean, he's not going to be a 190 hitter for a full season, but I think he's going to be closer to that guy that he was in the first half last year than he is to the guy that caught fire late in the season last year. So, if he's a guy they're relying on to be super productive and, set the table for Seager and some of these other guys in the order, I don't know if he's going to deliver. All right, prospect watch. I think I have a little mistake here, most likely. Yeah, I do. I have 25th ranked farm system jotted down in my notes here, which is what I also said the Angels were. So obviously that is a mistake. So we'll just get right into the actual prospect himself. The prospect to watch that I have here is Josh Young. So he's the 67th ranked prospect on average across the major rankings, in the major top 100 rankings. And he's been a guy that, I've had my eye on. I know a number of people have had their eye on, and we've been waiting for quite a long time. This is you see his first Bowman Chrome from 2019. So he was drafted was he drafted in 2019 or was he part of the 18 draft class? He was actually, yeah, he was the 8th overall pick in 2019. So he's been kind of hanging out there for a while. Big chase back in 2019 Bowman, and he's just this big, powerful. You can kind of see it here, and this is when he was still young, even younger, hadn't bulked up or filled out quite as much. He's just this big, powerful third baseman. He had 33 homers in his college career, which is quite a bit. He slugged .538 in the minor leagues. So this is just a guy who's going to hit for a ton of power. Texas is known, at least the old ballpark was known for being kind of a power hitter's haven. I think the new ballpark is relatively similar. So I think the expectation is that he's going to break camp as the starting third baseman with the Rangers this year. And if that's the case, then he could be a major X factor, especially if Simeon isn't as productive as I expect. He could be a major X factor for this team, slotting in as a big power bat in the middle of that order to allow them to make a potential postseason, run at the postseason, a wild card, or I don't know if they're going to challenge the Astros, but at least a chance to go for the wild card. Another guy I just want to call out, I don't have a ton to say about him yet, is just Evan Carter. He's the next big prospect in the system. For the Rangers, he's having himself a really, really nice looking spring. I know our guy Filmington over there is a big fan of his, picking up some of his stuff. So Evan Carter is just another guy just to keep your eye on as far as Rangers prospects go. So once Josh Young graduates and becomes a full-time player and is no longer at prospect status, this guy's gonna propel himself to be the number one prospect in that organization. And I think he's a guy that people really like. All right, potential breakout candidate, maybe sleeper. Sleeper is probably a better way to put it for this guy. It's going to be Leody Taveras. So, not the flashiest player in the world. Hasn't really had himself super productive career up to this point. But he's one of the fastest players in the major leagues, which is seeming to becoming a theme in some of these reviews. We already talked about Ruiz and his ability to steal bases and his 85 steals in the minors. But Taveras was in the 96th percentile for sprint speed among major leaguers during his career. So, the Rangers steal, I think, more than anyone in the bigs. Then I'll mention the rule changes again, the bigger bases, the pitch clock. A guy like this, if similar to Ruiz, if he could just get on base, he could easily be stealing 40, 50 bags in a season, which makes him super valuable. I think he's going to be hitting at the bottom of that order, but if he can, like I said, manage to get himself on base and, take second, take third, he could move his way up that order, maybe even slot into that leadoff spot at some point during the season. So not expecting a huge breakout, not expecting a ton of production. He's not going to hit for any power, but if he can get on base, he could be, we could see for the first time in a while a ton of really good base stealers in the game. We haven't seen that in a number of years. All right, Rangers over-under time. Their over-under this year was 81.5 games, so slightly better than the over-under that was assigned to the Angels. Last year, they only won 68 games, which was pretty putrid, to be sure. So I'm going to have to say, even though they're a little bit of a top-heavy team, they have DeGrom at the top of the rotation. The rest of the rotation is serviceable, not great. They have Seager, they have Young, they have Simeon. There's probably one other good offensive player that I'm missing, that I'm forgetting about. So even though they're a little top heavy, I think they're going to contend for a wild card. So I'm going to go over 81.5. I could see them around 88 maybe. So I think that they're definitely a team that's going to make some noise in this division this year. All right, before we get to the big daddy of the American League West and the big daddy of the American League overall, we have to spend some time on the Seattle Mariners. So this was a team that made the wild card last year. I think had a little bit of a surprising run. I didn't think folks thought they were going to be that good. But they came into their own, a good young team, and they made themselves a nice little run. So looking back at their offseason, they made a few pretty nice moves. They added Teoscar Hernandez, who's always kind of surprisingly productive every single season. Another guy, to me, kind of similar to Marcus Simeon, where I'm always just like a little surprised to see how good his numbers actually are, but he's definitely a better player than Simeon in just my personal opinion. So he's a guy they added, and they're going to be able to slot into that order. Already full of really solid young players. They also added AJ Pollock and Colton Wong, so definitely good role players. for the team there, both in the outfield and the infield. As far as their losses go, they didn't lose anyone, I would say, huge. They lost Kyle Lewis, who I talked about in my video yesterday when I talked about the Diamondbacks, who I'm not a big believer in. And then they also lost Jesse Winker. This is a numbered rookie card of his back when he was with the Reds. So, he wasn't very productive for them last year. He was a stud with the Reds for a few years there, and then he kind of fell off hard with the Mariners last year. So I don't know if it'll be a huge loss for them, especially considering where his at-bats should go from here, with Pollock and Kelenic and some of the other guys that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. All right, stud and dud. The stud, there's no introduction needed for this man. It is Julio Rodriguez, and this is probably one of the more interesting cards I could have pulled out to show you for him. It's a cracked ice, or I think ice foil, I forget what it's called, from 2019 Bowman Platinum. His first year, he was a first Bowman guy in 2019. And this is just one of the first, quote unquote big cards I pulled when I got back into the hobby. It was a big chase. People loved J-Rod, and it was just a cool card that I like, and it always just sticks out in my head to me. So I wanted to, show this one off rather than, any of the 2022 rookie stuff. I actually don't have his first Bowman. The prices on that obviously went astronomical in the past couple of years. But he's the J-Rod show, right? He's the face of Topps right now. And he's potentially a generational talent. I know I used that phrase when describing Ohtani before, but J-Rod, fits that same mold. Obviously not as a two-way player, but he's a guy who just, if he continues along this trajectory, and obviously it's only been 1 year, but he can contend for an MVP, each and every year throughout, for the next decade. Everyone knows he had this unbelievable rookie season. He was an all-star. He was the rookie of the year. He had a 147 OPS plus. He played really solid defense in center field. And that was all at just 21 years old. So, when you look at this picture of him here in 2019, he was only, 18? And then, within 4 years, he was up in the bigs as a 21-year-old, just lighting the world on fire. So, if he kind of continues along this trend, I think it reminds a lot of people of what we saw with Mike Trout. He came into the league, he lit the world on fire. He had all the talent in the world. And I think, a lot of people think we could see a very similar Mike Trout situation. That's probably a lot to put on a kid's shoulders and a lot to expect of him. And, it's poising all of us for disappointment. But, he has that level of talent. So he definitely could do it. And I think that he'll be a guy who's obviously in the MVP mix, not just this year, but many years going forward. All right, bust candidate, our dud of the Mariners. I'm going to go with Logan Gilbert. So he's a pitcher I think a lot of people actually like quite a bit, but I think there's a lot of red flashing lights for him for regression this year. So he had a big innings jump from 2021 to 2022, more than 60 innings increase. And there's some old statistics dating back years ago that I used to read about when I was on Yankee forums and other baseball message boards and things, where these guys who had these big innings jumps, especially these youngsters, even as little as 15 or 25 innings or something from year to year when they're this young, it's always followed with a down season, or at least a relatively, regularly. So not even just the innings jump, but he gives up a lot of hard contact. His second half was considerably worse than his first half was. It was a whole run worse ERA-wise. So, obviously not super great to hear that. But I'm not saying he's going to be atrocious, but I am saying I think we'll see a pretty noticeable regression because he did have himself a really strong campaign last year. But I think we'll see, like I said, a regression that's fairly noticeable. And of course, the stands are going down. It wouldn't be a JAC Baseball Collector video if the stands cooperated for the entire time. But yeah, I think that Gilbert he'll be a serviceable starter, but he's not going to be the guy that we saw last year who was just, unworldly. All right, pivoting to Prospect Watch. They have the 20th ranked farm system, so I think I did get this one correct. So they have the 20th ranked farm system. And the number one guy to watch is Harry Ford. So he was a big chase in, was it 2021 draft? I think it was 2021 draft. He's the 66th ranked prospect on average. So not, one of the top tier guys, but he's still, relatively young and new. Mariners believe that he could be like a serious power threat from the catching position. So he has a lot of, and he also has a lot of speed. That's the other thing with him. So they think he could hit for a ton of power, remain as a catcher, which a lot of these guys who get drafted as a catcher, like say like a Henry Davis who was in the same draft class as Harry Ford, they don't think he'll stick at the position. They end up changing positions. It's very hard to stick at the catching position, especially if you're an offense first guy. But they believe Harry Ford will be that kind of guy, and he also, like I said, has serious speed. It is not just the kind of quote unquote for a catcher speed. It's legitimate speed, and maybe that's just his youth or whatever. But if he's a guy who could have a speed power combo and play decent catcher's defense, you're talking about a very special player. So a lot of people have compared him to Craig Biggio. That was one of the things I read. So probably more power than Biggio, but I think in terms of the way he's able to move and his speed as a catcher, if everyone remembers, Biggio actually came up as a catcher before becoming a second baseman and then ultimately becoming an outfielder. Definitely one of the more well-rounded guys over the course of a career. But if he could be in that mold, that's obviously a very nice career to model yourself after. So Mariners are going to have a good problem on their hands in a couple of years with with Cal Raleigh, who's already establishing himself as the Mariners backstop, and then this guy coming up through the system. I think you probably in a couple of years give the edge to Ford, just with his pedigree and as a top overall kind of draft pick. But it's definitely a good problem for them to have, and it'll give them some flexibility. All right, big bounce back candidate time. Guy that I'm expecting to bounce back. When I'm in the midst of filming this video, he has been absolutely lighting the world on fire in spring training. His swing looks better. It looks different. And that's Jarred Kelenic. This is a guy I believed in from day one. Really liked him. Chased his stuff pretty hard in 2021. Obviously, his prices and other things have crashed down just given how dreadful of first two seasons he had in 2021 and 2022. But, just in my opinion, he was rushed to the majors. They made that trade. They traded off Edwin Diaz. They traded off Robinson Cano to the Mets. They got Kelenic, who was this highly regarded Mets prospect. A lot of my Mets fan friends here were devastated when it happened. But, he clearly just wasn't ready, and it made him fall flat. But he has just so much talent. He has such a good bat. He seems to have revamped himself, and I think that he's going to get himself back to that former top 5 prospect ways this season and beyond. So if he's able to kind of solidify himself as the right fielder wherever they end up slotting him, that's gonna help the Mariners take it to the next level for sure, because they were really counting on him. And he gave them absolutely nothing, and so if he's able to give them even a little bit of something, they're gonna be really in business. So, and when he did go down last year after he struggled, he raked in AAA. Like it's in there somewhere. So I expect him to start at the bottom of the lineup and slowly climb his way up throughout the season. All right, last guy to highlight here for the Mariners is a potential sleeper. I mentioned him already when talking about Harry Ford, and that's Cal Raleigh. So he had a really solid rookie season, mostly fueled by the long ball. He hit for a pretty low average. He was a solid catcher, but he hits for big power. And then he had those big playoff heroics. He had a walk-off homer in the wild card game to propel them into the ALDS, which obviously the Mariners ended up losing the ALDS. But he hit all the way through the minors, so he's another one of these offensive first type catchers. So if he continues to build on that and is able to kind of get the average and on-base percentage up a little bit just to match the power, then he can solidify himself into that top 10 catcher conversation and make it a really hard decision on the Mariners when Harry Ford's ready of, what is this team going to do? All right, over-under time for the Seattle Mariners. Their over-under is 88.5 wins this year. They did win 90 games last year, like I said, which was a little bit surprising. I think they shocked some people with that showing. I do expect a small regression from them this year. I think that they overachieved last year. Maybe they will do better if Kelenic, booms, if J-Rod continues developing, they get that solid pitching like they got last year. But I'm going to say a very minor regression, especially because I expect the Rangers and the Angels to both be better. So I'm going to say under 88.5 in a very competitive AL West division this season. All right, let's close it out. We're coming up on 35 minutes here. I can't believe it. Let's close it out with the Houston Astros, the model of consistency, the absolute juggernaut of the American League, the Houston Astros to close out the AL West. So off-season moves, they definitely had themselves a busy off-season. Really kind of one guy on each side. I shouldn't say super busy, but one guy on each side that's of particular note. The big addition was Jose Abreu. So this guy's just a model of consistency. His power numbers did fall quite a bit last year. I think he only hit something like 15 or 16 home runs. But he's just been the model of consistency with the bat over the past decade. He's going to slot into the middle of that order. Maybe some of the power comes back with the Crawford boxes there in left field that he'll be able to golf some balls into. But he's a doubles machine. He hits for solid average. He gets on base. And he's going to be a leader in that clubhouse. The loss is a pretty big one. It's Justin Verlander. So this guy's the reigning AL Cy Young winner. He had a 1.75 ERA last year. It's hard to believe. He was 38 or 39 years old. He had a 1.75 ERA last year. Even if he didn't pitch like that at 39 or 40 this season, it's just going to be hard to reproduce that production. So whoever ends up taking his innings, they're not going to pitch to a 1.75 ERA. I think that that's probably pretty safe to say. Stud and dud, star and bust. We're going to start with the stud. I'm going to go with Yordan Alvarez. This is a guy I'm always super impressed with, and you have a nice looking Donruss the rookies parallel here. He's a guy I'm just like super impressed with every single time I see him. He had another really dominant season in 2022. It was actually the best of his career. He had 306 with an OPS over 1,000. Really great year, which I think got lost in the shuffle of the greatness of Ohtani and Judge's historic season. And he probably wins the MVP if those two guys don't exist, right? So if Judge doesn't hit 62, if Ohtani doesn't do Ohtani things, Yordan is your MVP. He's the third guy in line there. I think that he's probably one of the top 5 most feared hitters, or at least he should be in baseball. It feels like just every time he steps up to the plate, he could golf a ball from the left side of the plate into the stands. I don't need to go through all the numbers again, but it's just he seems to never kind of go cold. He's always a threat. If you make one little mistake to him, that ball is gone. It's that simple. All right, bust candidate, regression candidate. I'm going to go with Framber Valdez. Probably catch some flack here from some of my Houston friends, but I don't think he's going to be bad per se, but they're relying on him to be the ace of the staff. Now with Verlander gone, I just don't see him as an ace, and he obviously has these big shoes to fill at the top of that rotation. He had a really impressive season last year, but there are some kind of red flags for sure. He relies on balls in play quite a bit, especially ground balls, and now with some of the rule changes, without the shift, are a lot more of those balls going to get through? There's probably a really good chance that happens. And, he led the league in home runs allowed rate, which, you would expect for a guy who induces a lot of ground balls. But if that ticks up even a little bit, when adding into the fact that more guys might be getting on base because more balls are going to be squeaking through the infield, it's just going to be not an ace caliber season, in my opinion. And he's another one of these guys who potentially could suffer from one of these big innings jumps from 21 to 22. Yeah, he was another guy with a 60-plus innings jump from 2 seasons ago to last season. And so, there could be a fatigue factor to be considered. So, like I said, he's not going to be bad. It's not like he's going to, be run out of town. He's not going to be a bottom of the rotation guy. I just think he might struggle to be the ace that the Astros need him to be. Sorry about that, folks. My phone crapped out on me a little bit there, so I'm going to have to splice the video together. But where we were going to was the prospect watch for the Houston Astros. They're the 26th ranked farm system in the bigs. And the one guy I think that's worth calling out, I think he was the only guy I saw in their top 100 on MLB Pipeline, is this guy right here, Hunter Brown. He had a rookie card in 2023, Top Series 1. He was the 26th ranked prospect on average coming into this season, and he's an absolute fireballer. A lot of people have been comparing him to Verlander. They call him the mini JV. His mechanics are very similar. The way he throws is very similar. Obviously, he's a hard thrower with a dominant fastball, similar to Justin Verlander. But, he did have an ERA over 4 in the minors up until last year when he really kind of harnessed his stuff, and he became the Astros' top prospect. So he surged up, through the system, up the top 100 list. He was never really, I don't know if he was even ranked before last year. I can't recall. But he is a guy who can kind of get outside of himself, have some control issues, walk a lot of guys. But if he's able to, continue harnessing it the way he did last year, he's going to potentially be able to actually live up to that mini JV billing. Going to be hard to. Obviously, the guy's a future first ballot Hall of Famer, meaning Verlander, but this guy has a real chance to be a special starter for the Astros. So, I don't know if he's going to break into the bigs with the rotation. They have a lot of guys there with Framber and Christian Vasquez and McCullers, and I forget all their top five, but I think the first sign of struggle or an injury, he's going to swoop in and be able to take one of those rotation spots away. All right, let's get into a bounce, kind of a sleeper type candidate, a breakout candidate, and we'll wrap this video up. I know this one went on a little bit long as well, but I'm loving doing this. I hope you guys are enjoying it as well. So if you are, definitely like and subscribe to the channel. All right, sleeper candidate, breakout guy. I'm going to go with Jeremy Pena. Some folks might say, like, why do you have him as a breakout guy? He's already really good. He didn't have actually that great of a rookie season. He was the World Series MVP, and I think that's what we all remember, and that's why we hold him in high regard, and that's why his rookie cards are worth what they are right now. But he didn't really have, like I said, a really tremendous season. He had an OBP under 290 last year, an OPS plus of 101. Very average rookie season for the guy. Did play really good defense at shortstop, but he has plenty of upside. He has plenty of pop in the bat. Like I mentioned, the great defense. So if he could take the confidence, if he could harness the confidence that he gained in that World Series last year, being the hero, being the MVP, being the guy that made his rookie cards go through the roof, he could take his game to the next level and really propel him into kind of a top 10 shortstops in the major league type of guy. So I do like Pena personally. I don't know if he is going to get himself, because the shortstop class, the shortstop stock is just so great and so deep in the major leagues these days. I don't know if he's going to quite get himself to that level, maybe not yet, but he is a guy I believe in, and I think he could take that next step in his career starting this season. I got one more in terms of sleeper and breakout on the other side of the coin, pitcher-wise, and that's going to be Christian Javier. So I got this nice Donruss auto of him, signature series, nice shiny silver. Didn't really realize actually how good of a season he had in 2022. He had a 2.54 ERA with nearly 200 strikeouts. I mean, he had a really, really solid season. So it's hard to say that he's going to be a breakout candidate, because I think last year was his breakout. But I think he's still a little bit undervalued. So he might kind of fall into that sleeper camp. But I think that, unlike Framber, who I kind of knocked a little bit earlier in the video, he misses a lot of bats. That's such a a big thing for me. I'm really into that. I like strikeout pitchers. They're guys who have tend to be able to maintain a little bit better. So I think that he's still, like I said, still flying under the radar, and I think that he and Framber are going to be moving in opposite directions. I think that Christian Javier rather is going to continue getting better. Probably hard to get better from that year last year, but I really think he could do it. Whereas Framber, I think, will take a little bit of a step back. So this is a guy who could, solidify himself at the kind of the top of the rotation as Framber takes a step back into maybe that 2 or 3 role. All right, let's wrap it up with a quick over-under for the Astros, and we'll get you guys out of here. So they are at an over-under of 97.5 wins. They won 106 games last year. I mean, you kind of just have to assume they're going to win 100 games until proven otherwise, right? Like I said, these guys are the juggernaut of the American League. It's pretty obvious to me, even if I do expect the Mariners to be better, or the Mariners to be pretty good, the Rangers to be better, the Angels to be better. Even still, 4 of the last 5 years, I think excluding the COVID year, obviously being a short season, they've won 100 games. So until they prove to me that they're not going to be a 100-win team, I'm gonna hammer that over all day. It's a really high win total. It's hard to win 98 plus, but if there's anyone who's as close to a lock for 100 wins in this league as anyone, it's the Houston Astros. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the American League West. I hope you're liking this kind of content. I know these videos are a bit long. I'm going to try to timestamp them so you can bounce around to the different teams as you'd like, if I could figure out how to do that. But otherwise, keep an eye out this weekend for my 250 subscriber giveaway entry video, giving away a Topps Series 1 hobby box. So I hope you guys really like that. And otherwise, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of the AL West down in the comments. Definitely want to, talk some shop, talk some baseball with you guys. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next video. The best is yet to come. Thanks a lot. Take care.